Hello and welcome to our live stream on Tuesday. We're talking about Gone West Part 2, The Officer Following a Good Spirit. Now, before I begin, please subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell so you can be notified when I'm live streaming. I live stream every Sunday and Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. So, we have been for quite a few Tuesdays. We've been following the saga of the officer. Of course, this was a story brought by the officer to a medium, J.S.M. Ward, and he was a great book. And I have a link to the book. You can get the book free. It's called Gone West, and you see the book for free as you look below. And when I post this, so you can, it's a PDF, and it's a very enjoyable book. So the officer, give a quick background. The officer is a very focused, intelligent person who will do anything he can do to be on top. And when he died, he went to the lower zone, which is the umbra, which is on the surface of the earth, did some pretty bad things there. So then he was sent down, went to a city in what he called hell. It's actually, there's no such thing as hell. According to Spiritism, it's more of a purgatory where you're there only as long until you want to change your attitude and your character. So the officer went down to the city of hell, had a very strong willpower, was able to dominate many people, became a general, took over part of a city, got bored with that, went back up, did even worse things. He went way down into hell, and now he's struggling his way back, and he's in the city. And we're going to pick up right where he went to this one city, and he actually saw, and he was able to spot a good spirit because he'd seen a good spirit before. And he told him, look, you need to, don't stay too long in these bad cities. You're going to be caught there again, but that's up to you. But if you do, I want you to bring someone else. So he went to the city of Lust. He went to the, other type of cities, and he kind of, stayed around for a while. And now he understands very well that he's just tired of all of that. And he wants to, it's time for him to get out of Dodge, as we say. So let's carry on with the story. So he was in this city square, and he saw this person talking, and people were making fun of this person. But then he said, oh, I can tell this is the real person. So I'll start the narrative now. So this is what the officer said. I can see you are genuine, I began. Can you get me out of this place? I'm sick of it. Well, the good spirit replied, if you truly wish to escape, I can. I long to do so, I replied. Well, kneel down here and say the Lord's Prayer. I will say it with you to revive your memory. So the officer said, then I looked around and saw that the square was full of people, and for a moment I hesitated. Then I thought of what I had already suffered, and beside it the ridicule of these fools was nothing. So I sank to my knees and slowly repeated the Lord's Prayer after him. When I had finished, he cried, good, now follow me and do not let them lure you from my side. So let's talk about that for a second. Here he had all these people around, and of course, and you read this many times in spiritualist literature, once you turn yourself and you say, oh, I want to be better. I'm tired of this place with all these people, because all the people around you are just like you were, right? They're sarcastic, they're mean, they're non-supportive, they gossip about you behind your back, they like to inflict pain, they want to dominate you. It's not a nice place to be. And so they really don't like to see people escaping that, because those type of people, as they say, misery likes company, and that's how they are. But this officer said, no, I'm done. I want to be better. So I'll carry on. Quickly, we hurried through the city, but we were not to get away without opposition. A couple of men suddenly stepped in front of us as we came in sight of the edge of the town, for in this part there was no wall. The men cried, here, where are you off to? And my rescuer replied, we're going about our business. You go about yours. And the man said, thanks, but this is our business. You're one of these pestilent fellows who are ever trying to persuade our friends and boon companions to desert us. We are sick of your pious humbug. Be off and leave him, or you'll be sorry for it. Then the officer said, my rescuer raised his hand threateningly. Begone, you accursed spirits, out of my way. And at once one of the two raised a shout. One of the enemy seized him, and immediately a crowd rushed together, which became more and more threatening. My rescuer drew himself together and, raising his hand, concentrated his will. Out of my way, in the name of God Most High. As he spoke, he strode forward, and I followed. The crowd fell back before us, and although they murmured and threatened, it seemed as if we would pass through without molestation. So greatly they feared the strong will of my rescuer. So let's talk about that for a second. And I've said this about another ones I've talked about this, but in the spirit world, the higher the spirit, they're actually the more power they have. There is no contest from a high spirit to anybody on this low level in this dark abyss, in this area of purgatory. In fact, there's a story called Paul and Albert by G. Val Owen, who was a medium who got this from a spirit. And it was about Paul and his journey into where the officer is, into this hell-like city. And Paul was not a nice person. In fact, he was a doctor, but he was very materialistic. And as he was going through this horrible landscape, he'd met a woman who had been mean to previously. But she was trying to help him. And she got, she kept saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. And finally got mad at her. He goes, no, I want to know how to get out of here. And he started to pick up a stick, and he started to hit her with this stick. And then all of a sudden, he couldn't move his hand. He was paralyzed. And then the guardian angel, that was his, but also the one who was actually helping the woman too. So he saw that was her, and she had held his hand. Now here's this little woman, and here's he was just used to being bigger than these little women, right? And he just could not move because her will was just, there was no contest, was stronger than his. And he said, no, you're not going to do that to her. She stayed around here trying to help you, and you've done enough harm. Now you go on your way. So there are little interventions like this in the spirit world where, where people who are on earth, right, who pass over, they're always immortal. Remember, you're always immortal. They went to the very low, dark abyss, the purgatory There's still good spirits around them, waiting for them to want to be better. There's always being watched and helped when they want to. This is called free will. If you want to boil down why there's chaos, why there is, harm and meanness and bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, why all that happens, right? What's all this unfairness about? Well, free will. Think about that for a second. We have free will to be as mean and rotten and nice and grateful and loving as we want. And therefore, all of us on this, around the same, there's all great variations in spiritual maturity, but we're all here on this planet of atonement. And what I mean by planet of atonement, we are here because we have to pay for our past wrongs in order to improve our character and our personality. So in this purgatory, you have all these people who are not nice, right? And so the people who are not nice, they go to this area, and guess what? They get to be with people like them. It's not like on Earth in our physical realm where they can go and target people who are nice and take advantage of them, rob them, or whatever they want to do. No, they're all like they are all on that level, right? Some are worse and some are better than others, and there's good in everyone. And of course, when I talk about these immature spirits on earth who do wrong things, that's how we should look at them. They're just ignorant, immature spirits who one day will become very good, right? One day they will be like Mother Teresa. One day they will be a loving, wonderful person. But God, and then through commands to Jesus Christ, who is in charge of our planet and other planets besides, is shepherding us through life after life in a quest to change our character and our attitude for the better. And that's why we have definite life plans. So then the officer said, but just as I thought we were safely through, a woman sprang from the crowd and threw her arms around my neck. She was one whom I'd ruined when on earth, and she claimed me as her own. My rescuer seized her arms, untwined them from my neck, and threw her back into the crowd, screaming. Then, one of the two men who had previously barred our way at my throat, I drew my will together and struck him to the ground. He sprang at me again, and this time his companion also followed suit. But my rescuer bent quickly forward and touched each of them on the arm, and they fell back shrieking, with the arm which had been touched withered as if by fire. This is, and I'm sure the rescuer probably tried to touch them as little as possible, but it just shows you just the overwhelming power of a higher spirit. Thoroughly cowed, the mob fell back and we passed through safely. Soon we were out in the open country. Don't let there be any misunderstanding. I used the word to distinguish it from the town, but there was nothing country-like save the lack of houses. There were no trees, no grass, no bird singing, not a flower, nothing but hard rock and sand and stones. On we journeyed, and presently in the distance I saw a faint star-like light. And then he said, well, is that another rescuer? The officer cried. He goes, no, he replied, that is a small mission center or rest house. And to it I am taking you. It stands at the edge of the barrier which separates this division from the one above, in which are to be found materialists for the most part. There I hope you'll be able to rest for a short season and obtain strength to enable you to pass through the remaining divisions of hell up to the schools. So again, this description of purgatory corresponds with other descriptions of purgatory by the great mediums of Chico Xavier, Allan Kardec, when talking about hell in his books, Heaven and Hell, G. Val Owen, that as you go lower and lower, there's not really any green. There might be a little bit of fungus, right? That was and kind of trees that are dead sticks. That's it. It's the hatred and the bad vibrations. Nothing beautiful stands for long, really, because they're not beautiful people being there. They don't have good thoughts coming out of them. Remember, in the spirit world, we are our thoughts. So then the officer said, so slowly the faint star grew stronger, and after a while I found we were following a path, narrow but well beaten, as if many passers by. Who has beaten this path? I inquired. And he has answered, the messengers who pass to and fro rescuing the lost. You seem surprised. But for how many countless ages have men on earth reckoned time, and therefore how much longer to us who labor here, have the messengers come seeking the lost? Long before Christ came down to earth, there were spirits laboring here. Then the officer said, was the land of after death organized very much as it is now, even before the opening of the Christian era? And he was answered, yes, save that more spirits, as a rule, had to pass through hell. The more primitive a man is at death, as a general rule, the less will his spiritual side be developed. The less his spiritual side is developed, the longer he will be on the astral plane, and the more likely to pass for a time into hell. But there comes a point in the development of man when his intellect becomes developed at the expense of his spiritual side, and then sooner or later the advance of civilization will have a setback. So let's talk about that for a second. So Christ created the earth, right? He was part of a group of high spirits that actually fashioned our solar system and fashioned the earth. And there has been spirits, even Earth, when it was just, more of a fiery ball and so cool. But those were only spirits. And then it guided the whole evolution of plants and animals and humans until they became able and intelligent enough to hold a free-willed soul, right? Before then, they held a primitive soul, more like an animal that relied mostly on instinct with a little bit of free will too, right? There's always some free will, no matter what the animal is, right? But you don't really have free will until you are a human soul. And that's, if you're on this planet or other planets, that's the dividing line. And so also he said, more people had to pass through this purgatory because the collective humanity on Earth at the time, were less civilized being, being truthful, honest, charitable. Now, Chico said in around, I can't remember what year, 1970s or whatever, he said about 30% of the people actually, when they passed over, went to a level in heaven. That means 70% of the people went to either on the lower zone or into a purgatory-like structure. And you wonder what it was before Jesus came to the earth. It may have been, what, 10%? I would like to know that. Is it 10 or 20? Because then you could see how many thousands of years it takes to go up. Because why am I interested in what the percentage is? Because what we're told by the books by Allan Kardec, we're told that when the earth has more than 50%, when the majority of people are good, mature spirits, that doesn't mean everyone has to be Mother Teresa, right? It just means that when you're basically honorable, you are somewhat spiritual, you are a good person, you're charitable and you're fraternal. You don't have to be perfect, but when more than 50% become like that, then really things will start going towards a planet regeneration much faster. Because as we all know, humans are kind of a herd animal, and we follow the herd. And when we have good examples to follow, we go, oh well, if we do something bad, we're going to look really bad. We need to follow those good examples. Now, of course, in our culture now, what kind of examples do we have? Not very good. I mean, what you see on the news and these reality TV shows, it's pretty disappointing. That's why I tell everybody, don't watch the news and watch as little TV as possible, because most of it is pretty bad. So then the spirit goes on, and now the other thing he said, then sooner or later the advance of civilization will have a setback. And so this is very interesting, and this corresponds with what spirits told the Reverend J.S.M about the spiral organization of progress. Let me read some more, and I'll talk about that. The spirit said, thus in the days of the Greek and Romans, the intellect outran the spiritual development, and so hell became crowded with men who refused to believe in God or a future life. The fall of that civilization, though for a time it threw back civilization, made it easier for men in the West to develop their spiritual side. At times I fear that a similar catastrophe may once more be necessary, but God is merciful, and we from this side are anxiously working to infuse new spiritual life into the world without the necessity of such a disaster. So this is very interesting. I read this once before, but I didn't notice this before. And this corresponds to what the great medium, Chico Xavier, Francisco C. Xavier, written many great books, talked about. So let me go back for a bit first. It talks about when civilization develops, and it has to go back again. So we've been told by spirits in the book by J.S.M and other books, actually by Emmanuel, by Chico Xavier, that there has been Lemuria, Atlantis, and actually two other civilizations that didn't give us a name. So the human race as a whole has advanced technically, but not spiritually, and therefore the ruling spirits, Jesus Christ, says, okay, well, they're advancing technology, but spiritually they're very behind, and we're going to just cut that off and make them go back to the land and understand that they have to have spiritual and technology advancement. It has to come together. And so then also in the book called On the Way to the Light by Emmanuel, he talked about Rome and how Rome was supposed to be this city on the hill with a good organization and helping other cities. Instead, they wanted to conquer and have great wealth. So what happened to Rome? It collapsed. It collapsed because the spirit world caused things to collapse, right? We are guided. This is so important. I think we are not alone. We are individually guided, but as a society, as cultures, every culture is guided by the spirit world. And Rome was okay. They're gonna let them collapse, and that's why you see all these like there's always these coincidences that happen. Like in World War II, how the Allies won, even though at first it looked like Japan and Germany were, unbeatable. They would just blitzkrieg and, kill everyone. But they lost. Same thing with communism in the Soviet Union. At some point after we finally got the people that finally got full of it and knew that it was a failed system, because the spirit world does not want socialism and communism. They want people to be self-disciplined, not having government impose that upon them, collapsed. Of course, many people here in Western civilization never got that lesson, and they still want this socialist utopia, which is not possible. Because why? Because who would be in charge of that utopia? It'd be men. It'd be humans, and humans are corrupt and not perfect, so it all become corrupt, just like Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, and the Soviet Union used to be, and China is now. Right? They have a ruling party. They're communists. They're not communists. That's their name, but that's not what they are. They are in there for power, and that's why anyone thinking we're going to have these perfect utopias, it's sad. I know and most of these people have good intentions, but it's not going to happen right now. So let me get back. So he says, so then it will make it fall, right? They'll have that civilization fall. So again, that happened to Atlantis, Lemuria, happened to Rome. Atlantis, Lemuria is like, almost the whole world. And then he said, I fear a similar catastrophe may once more be necessary. Now, this book was in the early 1900s. Well, in 1969, men went to the moon. And then there was a meeting by very high spirits, of which Jesus was a member. And they said, well, should we destroy Western civilization and bring everybody back to a more agrarian state, so they can learn to work and plow the land and be one with nature, and not forget about spirituality. And then Jesus said, look, let's wait 50 years, and if 50 years there's not a nuclear war, we will carry on to become a planet of regeneration. Well, that was 1969, and in 2019, that was the end of the 50-year period. So most spiritists believe, all of them I've talked to, believe that we are past that point and we will become a planet of regeneration. But here's the spirit saying, right? He's seen that history. And that's why when the spirits talked to Jiva, and they talked about the spiral process of history, and that is, it goes forward, right? But then it could be like collapse, but it doesn't collapse like nothing. It when it starts going up again, it has a firmer foundation as it went. Like in Rome, right? It collapsed, and then you had the Dark Ages. But then out of the Dark Ages came the Renaissance, and then became more democracy and all that, and the philosophers and all those things. And so you could say, well, how does all that work? Well, let's talk about, let's say, the American Revolution. And so how do you get the American Revolution, and how do you get the philosophy, especially the French philosophers, that kind of nudged it in a certain direction, Rousseau and so forth? Well, think about the spirit world. When someone dies, right, they're not gone. They're just taken off the chessboard, and now they're in the spirit world. Who decides where those people come back? So the spirit world will take the people who are enlightened and intelligent, and they will reincarnate them into a certain country, certain area, in a certain class, whatever they want, however they want to do that. So they will have a preponderance of people that they want to move a certain nation or area or race into a certain guideway, right? Into a certain goal. And so you think about all the great prime ministers and rulers that Britain had during most of its history, but boy, they seemed awfully incompetent during the time of the American Revolution. And then during the time of the American Revolution, we had so many just amazingly competent and intelligent people. And so that shows you how the spirit world will move souls and put them in certain places. The same thing they did with the Renaissance. In fact, in the book On the Way of the Light, they said a lot of the artists and painters from the golden age of Athens reincarnated in Italy to be the leading, artists of the Renaissance. So, who knows where all these greatly intelligent people came from. So that's a little bit insight of how the spirit world actually guides the planet. So let me carry on to what this guy said. So he said, this is a good spirit saying, in early primitive days, the astral plane or hell held almost all who passed over for a long time. So, of course, so as Chico said, is 30%, right, in the 20th century, is probably like 1% in the early primitive days, right? Almost no one went in there. They all had to spend time in the astral plane. And then the officer said, well, this seems unjust, for they knew no better. And the spirit says, it was not unjust. It was simply a great natural law. Those whose whole lives were devoted to fighting and cruelty would naturally go on acting in the same way for a long time after death. It would only be after a long period spent on this side that they would begin to desire a different kind of life. All those who resisted the temptation to obsess would probably remain on the astral plane until they had developed sufficiently to pass upward to the spiritual plane. At the same time, the tendency to obsess among primitive people is very strong, and therefore many fall to hell. So, again, so you think about what we have 7 billion people on the planet. And I've heard that there's about 21 billion souls all around. So 30% of that, so let's say 1/3, round it up. So there's about 7 billion souls in heaven, 7 on earth, alive, incarnates, and 7 billion more discarnates down in the lower zone or in this purgatory. So you can see the good spirits are still greatly outnumbered, but there's more and more. It's a time, right? Every day, one person, they go through trials and tribulations. They see the light. They understand, like, oh, I know why I'm here. I'm here to be better. Why am I wasting my time trying to steal money from other people? Why am I trying to, go in debt for the the expensive car? It's not worth it. I'm immortal. I don't need that car. Will be rust. So it's just like the grains of sands on the beaches, one soul at a time. And that's all we can do is get one person at a time to start getting that path upward. It's a long process. So then the officer asks, is it the whole course of our life that fixes the particular division of hell into which we finally fall, or it is a type of obsession which we practice? And the good spirit said, well, many old men pass almost at once to hell. They have outworn their astral bodies almost as much as they have their physical bodies. These will sink down to the division corresponding with that type of sin which has predominated in their lives, hate, lust, and so forth. But those who pass over in early or middle life have not yet worn out their astral bodies, nor completely developed their character. Their division is that which corresponds with the type of obsession which they have practiced. That is the worst type. And then the officer interrupted, I understand in my own case, I obsess for drink, lust, and finally for revenge. The latter, being a more spiritual sin, dragged me down deeper than would be the other two types of obsession. So when they're talking about obsession, that means like your desires and so forth. And they say, well, they're dragged down and so forth. But Spiritism have given this a name. Now, this book, Gone West, is not Spiritist literature, but I'm going over it because it corresponds almost perfectly to Spiritist literature, although they explain things a little bit different. But that's why I'm here. It's really what it is. It's called the law of affinity. And the law of affinity What does that do? It puts a like to like. So if you're like here, if you are a pickpocket and you're a petty criminal, you'll go with other more petty criminals. If you're a major criminal, murderer, assassin, you'll go further on down and be with those people. Guess what? You get to be with people like you. If you are in one of the levels of heaven, you'll be with people like you. You'll be in the same kind of general area of spiritual maturity and what you like and how you are. That's why heaven is so wonderful, because you are with people who are have an affinity with you. You are with people that want to support you and love you, and you are given chances to have great friends and conversation and to work what you want to work at. And you're also given many chances for education, which I talk a lot about in my other talks, especially in my book, um, Spirits in the Spirit Universe, all about what are spirits. So, so then my rescuer continues. He said, at the same time, the type of life a man has lived very largely decides the type of desires which is likely to tempt him the most. A lustful man, if he falls into this desiring constantly of lust, will probably do it for the purpose of satisfying his lust, and so will fall ultimately into the division in which lust predominates. But here is the mission center or rest house. So then, as he spoke, the officer said, I saw a building plainly yet strongly built. The door was small, and windows there were none, save at the top above the door. From this came the light we had steered by so far. My rescuer hammered at the door, and as it opened, a flood of light poured out, which blinded me for the time. My rescuer seemed to drag me forward, but I could see nothing. I only heard the door crash behind me. So here's our officer. He's finally in one of these little outposts, which there are many. There are outposts in heaven, in the lower, and I'm sorry, in the lower zone and in the dark abyss, which they're calling purgatory or type of hell. There are outposts to help people. In fact, there's the whole story of an outpost which helps suicides. And this is a great book. In fact, one of the persons said that he left a comment on YouTube and said, I love this book. And I'm just actually rereading it again. This is maybe the third or fourth time. And it talks about what happens to suicides. Now, what I'm going to say, there's always exceptions. In fact, I'll tell you right now, one exception is this poor woman who committed suicide because her husband killed her child and beat her. She was not, she was taken right to heaven and helped to recuperate. But generally speaking, and this book will tell you, is when you commit suicide, you are in a place like was described by the officer, but you're with other suicides. You're like in this valley where there's other suicides, and you have to stay there until your planned life was naturally going to end. So this is so important to talk to anyone who is even considering ending their own life. You're not going to make it better. You're going to go into a much worse situation. And it is so sad because they've also been told. So talk about outposts first. So these people were taken to a spirit hospital in the lower zone, not in heaven, but in the lower zone, had walls around it. And they were mentally helped. They were trying to be cured of, like the Camino Bronco, who shot himself in the head. When he was in the Valley of Suicide, all he did was sit there in the Valley of Suicide, and he had like blood coming out of where he shot himself in the head, because that wasn't he's immortal. He can't kill himself, and he's kind of his other friends would go, how are we still alive? Because there's blood coming out of my head all the time. Because, well, you're immortal, and that was your paraspirit. You damaged your paraspirit is what happened, and that damage has to be fixed. So they were given passes, they were given instruction, they went down on field trips down to the earth. And what's really amazing about this book, it talks about the planning for reincarnation for a suicide. And this really pertains to everybody. And what they do is they will take their whole history and then they will analyze what are their main faults. And then they will actually, now for those who are really bad shape, they will make the plan. The spirits, higher spirits, will make the plan and just then submit that soul to be reincarnated without asking or any consultation whatsoever. But for spirits who are lucid, who can, who have reached some sort of spiritual, equilibrium, they will say, okay, this is kind of our plan. What do you want to improve? And then they'll go through a detailed blueprint, a program, right? Of these are the major things that will happen to you. And these things will each be some sort of stimuli to have you analyze your behavior, and so that what you've done before you would never do again. And in kind of like a simple example, if you had taken advantage of someone and you had stolen their money, well, when you are on earth in your next life, your money will be stolen, right? Or your inheritance will be stolen. Or if you murder someone, you will be murdered, right? And not nice, but those will happen because you'll learn what it is to be like that. And of course, you will be. And they were talking about this hospital of, to help suicides. They will watch them. They know everyone they've helped in that huge campus, and they will watch them and they will pray for them constantly when they're reincarnated. But they will have a definite plan. Now, so many people say, well, is everything predetermined? No. And they explain this in this book too, and which I also explain in my books. But this is really another excellent book. You should read anything you can about by Spiritist authors. It's just fascinating things you learn about the real world, right? The spirit world. So the major, if you want to know what you've done in your past life, you don't need to go have a past life regression. All you really need to do is analyze the trials and tribulations you've gone through, the major dramas in your life. You can pretty well determine kind of what you've done wrong. So think about that. So the major things, like who you marry, maybe the job you get, the house you buy, right? Those are probably all planned out. Some accident or some major illness, those are all planned out. Losing your cell phone, getting a little fender bender on the highway, those are things that you go along on your life, right? The smaller things, those are not planned out. Not everything is 100% planned out. So then people ask, well, isn't that complete? Isn't that like, you have no free will? Because no, you have free will. These major events will happen. Your free will exists in how you analyze and you react during these events. So I just wanted to bring that to light because I think that is important to remember. And then if you want to know more about the lower zone, I talk about the lower zone and that type of stuff in my book, Heaven and Below, book 1 of Spiritism. I also talk about heaven, right? And then I try to really explore Jesus Christ and what he is, because he is not just the wonderful carpenter that came to earth. He is just marvelous CEO, president of our sphere and the spheres of heaven, and his power goes down into purgatory. It touches everywhere. And so when you say, well, if all this terribleness and people go to, this purgatory, how can that be? How can, God is supposed to be good and forgiving? How can that be? Well, it's all part of the process, and it's a perfect process. And the more you think about it, it's a wonderful process because you have free will to be as rotten as you like to be, and you've got all the time in the world to decide not to be rotten. And if you are rotten, well, guess what? You get to go with other people who are rotten just like you. That's how it works. And when you come to earth and you've done things in the past to people, right? Well, those things are going to happen to you. It's all a learning. It's all edification. There is no punishment. It may seem like punishment because bad things are happening to us, but it's all about a learning experience. And would you want everyone to be just really nice people because they would put like some sort of chip in our brain and make us nice, even though maybe we're not a nice person, but we'd have no free will to be internally and foundationally a loving person? No, you don't want that. They are going to let everyone grow be a unique personality, unique character, and grow to be nice through thousands and thousands, maybe a million years of trial and tribulation. That's how it works. So what happens when you have very high spirits? They're not like all the same, right? They're not robots who are just all perfectly good and loving. No, they're good and loving, but they all have their unique characteristics. That is the genius of the spirit world. So I hope this has been interesting. If there's any questions, please let me know, because you can always ask questions, and I will try and answer them. And go to my blog, nwspiritism.com. You'll find a lot of information that is very interesting for you about Spiritism, because the more you can read and study about Spiritism, I guarantee you, is the more stress-free you'll become, because you'll understand things aren't as important as you thought they were, right? You're immortal. The house you buy, you know, your favorite car, it's all going to turn to rust and dust. The whole planet Earth will turn to dust eventually, and you'll still be somewhere. So we're all just here. We're like on this summer camp, this educational campus, for a little short time, right? 60, 80 years, whatever it is, or your lifespan is going to be. And hopefully, and what do you take with you? You only take your personality and your character. And if you haven't helped that to become better, then you haven't done a very good job on Earth. If you've become better, then that is a great victory for you. Anyway, what I want to say is God